The cathedral bells had not yet stopped ringing when Marigold Penhallow realized she was alone in the carriage with her husband of 40 minutes, and he had not looked at her once. Lord Corbin Vance, the newly minted Duke of Harrowden, sat across from her with his gloved hands folded over his knee, his attention fixed on the frost-laced window, as though the passing hedgerows held more interest than the woman he had just sworn, before God, to honor until death. The carriage swayed along the old post road. Marigold counted the seconds. She had learned as a girl how to count past pain, past silence, past humiliation, and she counted now because counting was the only thing that kept her from weeping into the heavy silk of her wedding gown. "We should reach Harrowden Hall before dusk," he said at last. His voice was low, measured, and entirely neutral. "The housekeeper has been instructed to prepare the east wing for you. You will have your own apartments." How thoughtful. He turned his head then, just slightly, and his eyes met hers for the first time since the altar. They were the color of slate after rain and utterly unreadable. "You are welcome to furnish them as you please. My steward will attend to any expense." How generous. Marigold. "Your Grace." Something flickered in his jaw, a tightening she could not name, and then it was gone. He turned back to the window. The carriage rolled on. She had known what this marriage was. Everyone had known. For 3 weeks, the drawing rooms of London had spoken of almost nothing else, and she had walked through those drawing rooms with her chin raised and her spine straight, pretending she could not hear the whispers behind fluttering fans. The mouse who married a dukedom, the plain Penhallow girl with the merchant father, and the enormous settlement. A bargain struck, they said, because old Harrowden had gambled the estate into ruin before dying, and his son had returned from the continent to find nothing but debts and a roof that leaked over the portrait gallery. So he had taken the first heiress foolish enough to have him. That was the phrase they used. Foolish enough. She was not foolish. She had known exactly what she was doing. Or she had thought she did, until the ceremony itself, when she had stood at the altar in a gown her mother had wept over, and watched Corbin Vance say his vows in a voice so flat it might have been a legal clerk reading a deed, and she had understood at last that the bargain was not what her father had described to her. It was worse. Her father had told her Corbin was a good man in a difficult circumstance, a private man who would treat her with respect, a man who needed a wife the way a drowning man needs a rope. Her father had not told her that Corbin Vance would look through her as though she were a window. She had not, in her 16 weeks of engagement, permitted herself to cry. She had been admired for that in certain quarters and ridiculed for it in others. The Penhallow girl, they had said, was either extraordinarily composed or extraordinarily cold, and no one could decide which, and Marigold had overheard the debate at 3 different parties and had declined to settle it. She had learned the composure at 11. She had learned it in a school her father had insisted upon, because a merchant's daughter, who might one day marry into rank, must be indistinguishable in her manners from girls born to it. And she had learned, in that school, that the fastest way to be indistinguishable was to laugh at nothing, and weep at nothing, and express opinions at nothing. And so she had come out of the school at 17, perfectly polished and entirely silent. And no one, including her father, had thought to ask what she actually felt about any of it. She had thought, foolishly, that she would tell the man she married. She had thought, in the week since the announcement, that there might be an evening, perhaps in a fire-lit drawing room, when Corbin Vance would ask her one question about herself, and she would answer it, and he would ask another, and by some long, slow accumulation of questions and answers, there would be at the end of it a man who knew her. She had rehearsed, during long nights at her father's house, what the first question might be, what she would say, how she would not say too much. She had prepared, in the way a girl raised in silence prepares, to be known. He had not asked anything, not at the engagement dinner, Not at the signing of the settlements. Not in the vestry after the ceremony, when the curate had stepped away to fetch the register, and they had been left alone for perhaps 2 minutes. The only 2 minutes they had been alone as husband and wife, and she had stood beside him with her new ring cold on her finger and waited. And he had looked at the stained glass above the altar with that same unreadable face. And when the curate returned, she had understood, in a small, terrible way, that the asking was not going to happen. The carriage turned off the post road onto a narrower lane. Bare oak trees arched overhead. Between their branches, she could see the first stones of a great house rising from the hollow, pale gray and austere, and more fortress than home. Harrowden Hall, Corbin said. It has been in my family since the reign of King Henry VII. You must love it very much. I find it serviceable. She almost laughed. It was the sort of thing she might have repeated in a letter to her sister, if she had a sister, or to a friend, if she had any friends still willing to claim her after the announcement. She had neither. What she had was a husband who found his ancestral seat serviceable, and who had not yet, in 40 minutes of marriage, asked her a single question about herself. The carriage slowed. A line of servants had assembled on the gravel sweep, the housekeeper at their head in crisp black, the footmen in livery that had clearly been let out for the occasion from whatever moth-nibbled trunk had stored it. Corbin descended first, then turned and offered his hand. His grip was steady. His eyes did not meet hers. "Welcome home, Your Grace," said the housekeeper. Her name, Marigold learned in the next breath, was Mrs. Halloran, and she had the kind of face that gave away nothing. "We have prepared a light supper. The master's rooms and the mistress's apartments are both ready. I trust the journey was not too tiring." "Not at all." "Very good, Your Grace, if you will follow me." Marigold followed. Her slippers made no sound on the stone flags. She was aware of Corbin behind her, of the servants watching her with careful curiosity, of the cold air of the great hall, which smelled of beeswax and old wood, and something fainter beneath it, damp perhaps, or the particular scent of a house too long without a mistress. She did not look at the portraits. She did not look at the staircase, though she felt the weight of it. She followed Mrs. Halloran through a set of double doors into a long corridor, and then up a different staircase, and then down another corridor, until at last the housekeeper stopped before a pair of carved oak doors and opened them. The bedchamber beyond was beautiful. Someone had tried. The bed was hung with green velvet. The fire had been lit. Fresh hothouse roses stood in a crystal vase on the writing desk. The roses, she thought, must have cost more than the household could afford. She felt a pang of something that might have been gratitude if she had been able to locate the person responsible. "I thought you might wish to rest before supper," Mrs. Halloran said. "Your maid has been shown to the adjoining dressing room, if there is anything you require." "Thank you, Mrs. Halloran. That will be all." The housekeeper curtsied and withdrew. The door closed with a heavy finality. Marigold stood alone in the middle of the room and waited for something. She did not know what. A knock, perhaps. A voice. Anything at all. Nothing came. She walked to the window. The park stretched away in winter brown and pale gold, and beyond it, half obscured by the skeletons of the trees, she could see the dark line of a river and the ruin of what might once have been a folly. Someone was walking along the river path, a man in a dark greatcoat with his hands clasped behind his back. Corbin. She watched him for a long moment. He walked like a man under sentence. He walked like a man who had married that morning and now needed the open air to forget it. She turned from the window. Her trunks had been brought up. Her maid, a soft-voiced girl called Prudence, whom her mother had hired specifically for this day, helped her out of the wedding gown and into a simpler dress of pale wool. Marigold let herself be attended to. She let the pins be removed from her hair and the long braid fall down her back. She watched her own face in the mirror and saw nothing she recognized. She had expected, on this day, to look different. Brides were supposed to look different. Brides looked, she had been told, either radiant or becomingly solemn, and what she looked like now was a pale young woman with shadows beneath her eyes and a mouth held deliberately straight. And she did not know how she was going to present that face across a supper table in an hour. "Will you be wanting supper brought up, Your Grace?" Prudence asked quietly. She had been well schooled. She did not look at the connecting door. "No, thank you. I will take it below." "Yes, Your Grace." Prudence. Your Grace? When the Duke retires, I do not know what the habits of this house are. I do not know how they do things here. I would be grateful if you would tell me what you learn. "Of course, Your Grace. Thank you." Prudence withdrew into the adjoining dressing room. Marigold was alone again. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the door that connected her apartments to his. It was a plain door, painted white, with a small iron handle. She had been told, by her mother, by the modiste, by every matron who had descended on her in the final week, what a wedding night required of a wife. She had nodded through all of it and retained almost none. What she retained was this: the door existed. The door would be opened. And when it opened, she would be expected to receive a man who had spent 40 minutes in a carriage with her and had not been able to think of one thing to say. She did not know, sitting on the edge of that bed, when the decision was made. She could not have pointed afterward to the moment. It did not arrive as a decision at all. It arrived instead, the way important things sometimes arrive, as a simple and quiet certainty in the center of her chest, and she stood up, because standing was what the certainty required, and she walked across the rug toward the connecting door. Marigold stood before it. She crossed the last step. She turned the small iron key in the lock. The click was very soft. It sounded to her own ears like a pistol. She stood with her hand on the key for a long moment, waiting for her own resolve to fail. And when it did not fail, she walked to the writing desk and sat down and took up a sheet of the house paper. Her hand shook. She set it down. She picked it up again. She wrote, in a steady copper plate, her governess had once praised. "Your Grace, I do not require your company tonight. I will send for you when I do. Marigold." She folded it. She slid it under the connecting door. Then she went to the bed, and she lay down in her pale wool dress with her boots still on, and she waited. She did not wait long. Footsteps on the other side of the door. A pause, the small sound of paper being picked up. A longer pause. She closed her eyes. She could picture him exactly. The Duke of Harrowden standing in his own dressing room with her note between his fingers, reading it in that same flat, measured way he had read his vows. The handle turned. It turned, and caught, and turned again, and stopped. Silence. She held her breath, and then, very quietly, a single word through the door. Not angry. Not cold. Something she could not name at all. Marigold. She did not answer. She heard him exhale. She heard perhaps the soft thud of a forehead against the wood, though she could not be certain. And then footsteps retreating, a second door opening and closing somewhere deeper in his apartments, and at last, the long, settled silence of a great house at night. She lay in the dark with her hands folded over her ribs and discovered, with a kind of distant surprise, that she was not crying. She had thought she would cry. She had prepared for it. What she felt instead was something harder and quieter, a small, fierce knot behind her breastbone that had not been there an hour ago. She had not known she was capable of locking a door against a duke. She had not known, either, that the silence on the other side would sound so much like a man who had expected it. She woke before dawn to the sound of rain on glass and the unfamiliar weight of a strange ceiling above her. For a full minute, she could not remember where she was. Then the green velvet hangings swam into focus, and the memory of the previous day arrived in a single unwelcome rush. The ceremony, the carriage, the locked door, the single word through it. Marigold. She sat up. Her boots had left dark scuffs on the embroidered coverlet. Prudence, when she came, said nothing about them, only drew a hot bath and laid out a morning gown of dove gray, and asked whether the mistress would take breakfast in her rooms or below. Marigold considered the question for longer than it deserved. To breakfast below was to see him. To breakfast above was to admit she could not. "Below," she said. The breakfast room faced east. A weak winter sun was beginning to push through the clouds, and the long windows showed the park still glittering with last night's frost. Corbin was already there. He rose when she entered. He rose properly, with the small bow that a husband owed a wife in a household that observed such things. And Marigold understood, with a flicker of unease, that he intended to observe every such thing. The locked door had not altered him, or it had altered him only in ways she could not see. "Good morning. Good morning, Your Grace." "Marigold. Your Grace." He let it go. He held her chair. He waited for her to be seated before he resumed his own. A footman poured coffee. Another set a rack of toast between them. The silence was not hostile. That was the terrible thing about it. It was simply, absolutely empty. "I thought," he said at last, "that you might wish to see the house today. The housekeeper can show you, or I can, as you prefer. You have time to spare? I have set the morning aside. How efficient of you." His jaw did the small tightening thing again. "Marigold." "I am sorry," she said, and meant it in some fraction of her. "I am not accustomed to this. I will learn the rules faster if you give me a day." "Take whatever time you require." She looked at him then, properly, for the first time since the altar. He was paler than she had realized. There were shadows beneath his eyes of a kind no man acquires on his wedding night from comfortable sleep. She thought, with a sudden unkind clarity, that he had perhaps not slept at all. The thought was satisfying and disquieting in equal measure, and she put it away. "Your Grace," she said, "Mrs. Halloran can show me the house. You need not trouble yourself." "Very well." He said nothing else for the remainder of the meal. When she rose, he rose with her. When she left the room, he did not follow. She did not look back. Mrs. Halloran was waiting in the great hall with a ring of keys at her waist that would have shamed a jailer. The tour began with the staterooms and proceeded through the library and the music room and a small chapel that had not been used. Mrs. Halloran confided, since the old Duchess died in the year of 1812. Marigold listened. She asked the right questions. She noted the rooms that were beautiful and the rooms that were closed off because the roof above them leaked, and she began to understand, slowly, the precise dimensions of the estate Corbin Vance had inherited. It wasn't grand. It had the shape and the bones of grandness, but the flesh had gone. Threadbare rugs, fires lit only in the rooms they used, a portrait gallery, where 3 of the frames were empty because the paintings had been sold. "When did His Grace come into the title?" she asked. 2 years ago, Your Grace. The old master was taken sudden. His Grace was in Lisbon on regimental business. He came home within the month, and he has been managing it since. Yes, Your Grace, alone, largely." The alone was delivered without emphasis, but Marigold heard it. She thought of a young man returning from a regiment to a house with 3 empty frames in the gallery and a gambling father newly in the ground. And she felt, against her will, the first small complicating thread of something that was not sympathy, precisely, but wasn't dislike either. She pushed it aside. "Tell me about the household, Mrs. Halloran. How many are you below stairs? 11, Your Grace. We were 23 in her late Grace's day. His present. Grace has been careful. Careful meaning? Meaning he has paid what he owed, Your Grace, before he replaced anything that was lost. Some of us were kept on at reduced wage. Some left. Those who stayed did so because they remembered the house as it had been, and because they hoped. Hoped for what? For it to be a house again, Your Grace. Marigold was quiet for a moment. She had not, in her preparation for this marriage, thought of the servants. She had thought of Corbin, and of the estate in the abstract, and of the social obstacles she would face, and of her own mother's disappointment, and her father's grim satisfaction. She had not thought of 11 people in the kitchens, and the linen rooms, and the stables, who had stayed at reduced wage, because they hoped the house would be a house again. She understood now that Mrs. Halloran was telling her something. "Thank you," she said. "I will remember that." "Your Grace." Marigold walked on with her, noting what the housekeeper did not say aloud. The West Wing had not seen fresh paint since the old Duchess's time. The linens in the guest rooms had been turned and turned again until the initials in the corners were faint. The silver had been polished hard that morning for the new mistress, but the tarnish along the edges told her that the polishing had been done oftener by fewer hands than a house this size should have required. She did not comment. She did not need to. She understood that Mrs. Halloran was showing her everything, and that Mrs. Halloran was showing her the truth of everything, and that this was a courtesy a housekeeper pays only to a mistress she has decided, for whatever private reason, to accept. And this wing? The north wing, Your Grace. It has not been opened in some years. Why? Mrs. Halloran hesitated. It was the first hesitation of the morning. His late Grace did not care to have it opened. And his present Grace? He has not given instructions either way, Your Grace. Then let us open it. The housekeeper's hand tightened on the keys, then loosened. As you wish. The north wing was cold. Dust sheets covered every piece of furniture. The windows were shuttered. Marigold walked through 2 saloons, and a smaller sitting room, and a long gallery, before she came to a set of doors at the end of the corridor, and it was here that Mrs. Halloran stopped. This was her late Grace's apartments, Your Grace. His mother's. Yes, Your Grace. Open it. Mrs. Halloran opened it. The room inside had not been disturbed. It was the room of a woman who had expected to return to it. A book lay open on the bedside table. A shawl was folded across the arm of a chair. On the dressing table, a silver-backed brush still held a few strands of dark hair. Marigold stood in the doorway and felt, suddenly, as though she had walked into a prayer. He keeps it this way? He does not come here, Your Grace. Then who? I do, Your Grace. Once a week. On Sundays. Marigold turned. The housekeeper's composure had not wavered, but her eyes were bright now, and Marigold understood, abruptly, that she was standing before a woman who had loved the late Duchess, and was still, after 14 years, performing the small weekly act of keeping her room ready. She understood also that Corbin Vance had permitted this, had perhaps requested it. Thank you, Mrs. Halloran. Your Grace. I will not disturb anything, but I would like to come here sometimes. Of course, Your Grace. May I ask you one question? Yes, Your Grace. Her late Grace. Was she happy in this house? Mrs. Halloran was silent for a long moment. She looked at the shawl on the chair. She looked at the book on the table. When she spoke, she did not look at Marigold at all. She was loved in it, Your Grace, by her son, and by the servants who knew her, and by the village. She was not always happy. I will not pretend she was, but she was loved. Thank you. Your Grace. They closed the door together. She did not see Corbin again until the afternoon. She had gone after the tour to walk in the park, because she could not bear the inside of the house any longer. The path along the river was the one she had watched him take the night before, and she found she could not avoid it. It was the only gravel walk that had been kept clear. She walked slowly. The cold was sharp and clean. She had almost reached the folly when she saw him, seated on a stone bench with a ledger open on his knee and a pencil in his gloved hand. He had not heard her approach. He was not reading the ledger. He was staring at the river, and his face, in profile, unobserved, was the face of a man she had not yet met. Not the blank man of the altar, not the measured man of the breakfast table. Someone younger, more tired, and very near, she thought, to being afraid. Then he felt her, and turned, and the face shut like a door. "Marigold, Your Grace, you are walking." "I am. The river path can be slippery in this weather. You should take care." "I will." He rose. He closed the ledger. He bowed with the same small, formal bow that had greeted her at breakfast, and he did not offer her his arm, and she did not expect him to. "I will leave you to your walk," he said. "Your Grace." He walked past her back toward the house. She watched him go. When he was out of sight, she sat down on the bench he had vacated and discovered, on the stone, the ledger he had forgotten. It was not an estate ledger. It was a book of accounts, yes, but the accounts were not of rents and harvests. They were of debts, her father's money, itemized. Every thousands of the settlement her father had paid on her behalf, allocated line by line to a named creditor. Next to each name, a date and a note in Corbin's own hand. Paid in full. Paid in full. Paid in full. She turned a page. The debts went back 7 years. She turned another page. She saw the names of men she recognized from her father's own account books. Men her father had warned her about when she was 15 years old. Men who lent money to the kind of gentleman who could not pay it back, and who charged, in recompense, sums that ruined families by inches. Her father had pointed to those names once across a desk and said, "Marigold, if you ever see these names beside the name of a man who is courting you, you are to come to me at once." She had not come to him. She had not known. The names had not been spoken. Corbin had never brought them into her father's study. He had taken her father's money and paid these men quietly, one by one, and closed each account, and ruled a line under each sum, and written, beside each ruled line, "Paid in full." And at the bottom of the final page, in the same neat hand, a single line that was not an account. "Forgive me." Marigold closed the ledger. She sat on the stone bench with the cold seeping through her skirts and understood that she had married a man who had written the words. Forgive me in a ledger he did not intend her to see, and she did not know, sitting there with the river running black beside her, what she was supposed to do with that at all. She returned the ledger to the library without a word. She walked in, past 2 footmen who pretended not to see her, laid the book on the desk where he would find it, and walked out. She did not leave a note. She did not wish him to know she had read it. She wished, very specifically, for him to wonder, because she understood now that wondering was the only currency she had with her husband, and she intended to spend it carefully. Dinner that evening was a stranger affair than breakfast had been. He was already seated when she entered. He rose. He seated her. He spoke of the tenantry. He spoke of a road that needed mending at the southern edge of the park. He spoke of the weather, which was expected to turn. He did not speak of the ledger, and neither did she. And the ledger sat between them on the table as clearly as if she had set it down beside the salt cellar. "I have invited company for the end of the week," he said over the soup. Company. A small gathering. 4 persons. My cousin Lysander and his wife Harriet, and a man of business from London whose counsel I value. His sister will accompany him. "I see. I thought you might wish to meet my family. Your cousin." Lysander Vance, my nearest relation on my mother's side. He has been kind to me. He was kind to her. It was the first piece of personal history he had volunteered in 2 days. She filed it. I shall be glad to receive them. Thank you, Marigold. Your Grace. His eyes flickered up at her across the candles, and for a fraction of a second, she thought he was going to say her name again, the way he had said it through the door, and she did not know what she would have done if he had. But he did not. He turned his attention to his wine glass, and the moment passed, and the conversation returned to the road at the southern edge of the park, and the silence, when it came again, was less empty than it had been the night before. She lay awake that night and wondered about the sister. She did not know why. Corbin had given her no particular reason. He had mentioned the sister only as a footnote to the brother, and the brother had been mentioned as a footnote to the cousin. And yet, she lay in the green velvet bed, with her eyes open, and thought about a woman she had never met. A man of business's sister. A woman of no particular rank. A woman who, for reasons Corbin had not troubled to explain, was traveling from London in winter to attend a small gathering at a country house she had never been to before, in the company of a brother her host had described as having his counsel. She had learned, in 3 weeks of London drawing rooms, to pay attention to footnotes. Footnotes were where the truth lived. The truth was never in the main text of what people said. The truth was in what they declined to elaborate. She went down to breakfast the next morning and asked him nothing. The guests arrived on Friday in 2 carriages. Marigold had dressed with care, not lavishly. She had learned, in 3 weeks of drawing rooms, that to dress too well for her station was to invite a particular sort of smile, and she had no intention of inviting it in her own house. She wore pale green. She wore the single strand of pearls her grandmother had left her. She stood at the top of the entrance steps with Corbin beside her and watched the first carriage door open, and she understood, in the moment the first guest descended, that the end of the week had been a trap, although she could not yet tell whose. The man of business was called Mr. Redmere, Ambrose Redmere. He was tall and lean, perhaps 35, with very dark hair and a face that had been arranged, by God or by practice, to express nothing but polite attention. His sister was called Mrs. Solda Redmere. She was small and fair, and wore a shade of blue that made her eyes the color of summer water, and she curtsied to Marigold with a warmth that was almost too warm, and Marigold understood in the same instant that she had seen this woman before. She had seen her in a drawing room in Bruton Street 3 weeks ago, behind a fluttering fan, laughing at the phrase foolish enough. "Your Grace," Miss Redmere said, "what a very great pleasure. I have heard so very much about you." "How kind." "Corbin and my brother have been friends since they were boys. I feel almost as though I have known him my whole life." "Corbin!" She did not mean to say it. The name came out of her before she could stop it, because no one in 3 days had called him Corbin in her hearing, and hearing another woman do it with that particular soft emphasis had the effect of a stone dropped into still water. Miss Redmere's eyes widened, very prettily, very deliberately. "Oh, do forgive me, His Grace. Old habits. You understand. Of course. Marigold." That was Corbin, behind her, and for the first time since the altar, there was something in his voice that was not neutral. "May I present Mr. Redmere and Miss Redmere, my wife, the Duchess of Harrowden." "Your Grace," said Mr. Redmere, and bowed. "Your Grace," said his sister, and curtsied again, and smiled. And Marigold smiled back, because she had been raised properly, and because she understood, now, exactly what the small gathering was. It was an inspection. Cousin Lysander arrived in the second carriage with his wife Harriet, and they were both of them harmless and pleasant and slightly bewildered to be there, and they did not trouble her. Harriet Vance was a round, soft woman of 40 who had the kind of immediate, uncomplicated warmth that Marigold had not encountered in any drawing room in London. And when Marigold greeted her, Harriet took both her hands in her own and said quietly, "My dear, I am so very glad to meet you at last." Marigold did not trust it because she had been taught in 3 weeks to trust nothing, but she filed it too. Lysander was a tall, stooped man of perhaps 45 who looked like a gentler, kinder version of Corbin, as though someone had drawn the same face again and rubbed out the hard lines. He kissed Marigold's hand with old-fashioned courtesy and said only, "Welcome to the family, Your Grace. I hope you will find us bearable." She liked him for the sentence, which was the first sentence anyone connected to Corbin had spoken to her that did not contain a hook. Across the drawing room, all through the introductions and the tea and the small, flattering remarks, Marigold felt the weight of Mrs. Solda Redmere's attention, and she understood it as she had understood the fans in Bruton Street. She was being measured. She was being measured by a woman who had expected to be standing where Marigold was now standing. It was Harriet Vance, in the end, who said the one thing that mattered. She found Marigold by the tea urn, took the cup from her hand, refilled it without asking, and said, quietly enough that no one else could hear, "I have known Corbin since he was 7. He has not been a happy man for a long time. He has also not been a cruel one. If you can keep sight of the second while you are learning to live with the first, I think you will both come through." She handed the cup back. She squeezed Marigold's wrist once. She moved away without waiting for a reply, and Marigold stood with the cup in her hand and understood that someone in this room had just quietly taken her side. She excused herself after an hour, pleading the journey had tired her, though there had been no journey. She walked up the great staircase with her hand steady on the banister and her face composed, and she did not permit herself to hurry, because she knew Miss Redmere was watching her go. She reached her apartments. She closed the door. She stood in the middle of the room and pressed her palms flat against her cheeks until the heat in them subsided. Then she heard voices in the corridor below her window. 2 voices. A man and a woman. She knew, without going to the window, that she should not listen. She went to the window. She drew back the edge of the curtain half an inch. Corbin and Miss Redmere stood on the terrace below. They had walked out together, or Miss Redmere had followed him out, and they were standing very close, and Miss Redmere had her gloved hand on his sleeve. "You did not have to do this, Corbin." Her voice was low, but the terrace carried sound, and Marigold heard every syllable. "Papa would have found the money. He was looking. He was very near. Isolde, you did not have to marry her. I did. A merchant's daughter. A girl everyone has been laughing at for a month. Isolde, that is enough. Is it true what they are saying, that you cannot bear to look at her, that you have not even? Isolde." His voice, that time, not raised, not cold, something worse, something that sounded across the frozen garden, exactly the way his voice had sounded through the locked door the first night. Marigold let the curtain fall. She walked to the bed. She sat on the edge of it. She folded her hands in her lap, because her hands were shaking, and she had learned as a girl that folded hands did not shake as visibly as open ones. She sat that way for a long time, with the winter light fading at the window, and she thought about the ledger with "Forgive me" written at the bottom, and the room on the north wing with the shawl folded across the chair, and the woman on the terrace saying Papa would have found the money, and she understood, at last, what kind of bargain she had actually married into. She had not married a man who needed a rope. She had married a man who had refused a rope and taken her instead, and she did not yet know why, and she did not know whether the knowing would be a gift or a wound. She stood. She went to the connecting door between her apartments and his. She laid her hand flat against the wood and felt the grain of it under her palm. On the other side, she knew, the room was empty. He was still on the terrace. He would come up eventually. He would pass this door, and he would not try the handle, because he had tried it once and been refused, and he was not the sort of man who would try it twice. She turned the small iron key. She turned it back. Unlocked. Open. Then she walked away from the door and sat down at the writing desk and waited for the sound of his footsteps in the corridor. And for the first time in 3 days, she understood that she was no longer counting seconds against the pain. She was counting them towards something else entirely. She heard his footsteps just after the clock in the corridor struck 11. They were slower than she expected. A man walking with a weight he had not been carrying at breakfast. He paused outside her apartments, and she heard the small sound of a glove being removed, and then nothing at all. And she understood that he was standing on the other side of the door, listening, as she had listened to him the first night. He did not try the handle. He walked past. She let out a breath she had not known she was holding, and then, before her courage could fail, she rose from the writing desk and opened the connecting door herself and stepped through into his dressing room. He had already shed his coat. He stood in his shirt sleeves before the fire, with one hand braced on the mantel, and the firelight showed her what the drawing room candles had not. He was very pale. There were 2 spots of color high on his cheekbones, as though he had walked in from the cold without thinking to warm himself, and the line of his shoulders was the line of a man who had just received a blow and was waiting to see whether another one would follow. He turned. He saw her. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply stood with his hand on the mantel and looked at her across the firelit room as though he were not certain she was real. "Your Grace." "Marigold." "I heard you on the terrace." The small color left his face entirely. She watched it leave. He did not attempt to deny it. He did not attempt anything at all. He only lowered his hand from the mantel and stood with his arms at his sides, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had never in her life seen a man hold so still. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." "Marigold." "I would like you to explain it to me. I would like you to explain it now. I have been in your house 3 days, and I have slept in a locked room, and I have read a ledger I was not meant to read, and I have stood at my own window and listened to a woman who ought to have been your wife tell you that her father would have found the money. I am tired, Your Grace. I would like the truth." He did not answer at once. He walked instead to the small table beside the fire, and he poured 2 glasses of something dark from a cut-glass decanter, and he offered her one. She took it. Her hand did not shake. She was proud of that. "Sit," he said. "I will stand." "Then I will stand." He set his own glass down untouched. He looked, for a long moment, at the fire. When he began to speak, his voice was so quiet, she had to step closer to hear him. "My father gambled the estate to the stones. I knew it before I came home from Lisbon. I had known it for 5 years. He wrote to me only when he could not meet a note, and I sent him what I had, and he lost it again. And this went on until he died. And the lawyers opened the books, and I discovered that what I had been paying against was perhaps 1/3 of what was owed." He paused. "Ambrose Redmere is his oldest friend's son. You met him tonight. His father and mine were at school together. When I came home, Redmere offered to take the estate in exchange for settling the debts. He offered a price that was fair. It was more than fair. He is a decent man. I have known him since I was 8 years old. And his sister?" "His sister," Corbin said, "was always to have been part of that arrangement. Not explicitly. Never spoken of. but understood. Ambrose and I had talked once, years ago, when we were boys, and I had said something foolish, and he had remembered it, and he had raised his sister in a certain expectation. When my father died, he renewed the offer, the estate for the debts, and Isolde as part of the settlement. You refused. I refused. Why? He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. When he did not look at her. Because I knew him too well, because to take Harrowden from him on those terms would have been to be owned by him for the rest of my life, and I had been owned by my father for 31 years, and I would not be owned again. And because Isolde is, he stopped. He found the next words with visible difficulty. Isolde is a good woman, Marigold. She has done nothing wrong. But she has been raised to believe that a duchy is the equivalent of a deed of sale. And I have been raised to believe the same. And if we had married, we would have spent 50 years confirming it to each other, and I would have become my father. And I cannot become my father. I would rather the house fall down. And so you married me. I married you. A merchant's daughter. Yes. A girl everyone has been laughing at for a month. Marigold. Say it. Yes. She took a small sip of the dark liquid. It burned. She was grateful for the burn. Why me? Because your father is an honest man whose money is clean, and he offered a settlement that would discharge every debt in that ledger, and because he asked me, in his study, whether I could be kind to you. And I said I could. And then I came home, and I realized I did not know whether I could, because I had spent 2 years learning not to feel anything at all, and I didn't know whether I remembered how. He looked at her at last, and then I saw you at the altar, and I understood that I had done you a great injustice, and I didn't know how to undo it, and so I didn't speak in the carriage, and I didn't try the door, and I sat on a stone bench and wrote "Forgive me" in a ledger, because I had no other place to write it. She set the glass down on the mantel, very carefully, so that the small sound of it would not startle her. You thought I would not read it. I hoped you would not. Why? Because I did not wish to ask you for something I had not earned. The fire cracked. A log shifted. Somewhere in the house a door closed. Marigold stood in the fire-lit room with her husband, 3 paces from her, and understood that she was at a place she had not expected to reach for months, and perhaps not at all, and that whatever she said next would determine the remainder of her life. My father told me you were a good man in a difficult circumstance, she said. Did he know? About Isolde? About the offer you refused? He knew. And he did not tell me. He asked me whether he should. I said no. Why? Because the story was not mine to give you. It was Ambrose's, and Isolde's, and my father's, and mine. It was not your father's. If you were to hear it, I thought you should hear it from me, in my house, at a time when you could decide what to do with it. Corbin. He closed his eyes. Corbin, I am going to ask you one question, and I am going to ask you to answer it honestly. And if you cannot answer it honestly, I would rather you did not answer it at all. Ask. When Isolde Redmere told you tonight that I was a girl everyone was laughing at, what did you feel? He opened his eyes. I felt, he said, and his voice was not steady, that if she said your name in that tone one more time, I was going to forget every manner my mother ever taught me. She stepped toward him. She did not mean to. She stepped, and he did not move, and she stepped again. And then she was close enough to see the small scar at the edge of his jaw, and the grain of his shirt, and the place at his throat where his pulse was visible. And she lifted her hand and laid her palm flat against that pulse, and felt it stumble, and then steady, and then stumble again. Your Grace, Marigold. I am going to be very clear with you, because I do not wish either of us to misunderstand. I have not forgiven you. I have not decided anything. I am not going to unlock the door in my head that you have been walking around for 3 days, and I am not going to pretend that what you have told me tonight makes the last 3 days easier. It does not. But I would like you to know that I heard you. I would like you to know that I am not going to stand at windows anymore. If you have something to say to me, you will say it to my face. Is that understood? Yes. And I would like, she said, to ask you one more thing. Yes. I would like you to sit down. You look very tired. I would like you to sit down, and I would like to sit with you, and I would like us to be in a room together for an hour without speaking. I do not think either of us can bear any more words tonight. Can you do that? He sat down. He sat in the chair beside the fire, and she took the chair opposite, and they sat that way for a long time, while the fire burned down, and the clock in the corridor struck 12 and then 1, and neither of them spoke. And at some point she realized that his hand was resting on the arm of his chair, with his palm turned upward. Not quite an invitation, only a door left unlocked, and she did not take it, because she had said she had not forgiven him, and she meant it. But she looked at the open palm for a long time, and she understood that the silence between them tonight was not the silence of the carriage, and it was not the silence of the breakfast table, and it was something else entirely. At 2 in the morning, she rose and returned to her own rooms. She did not lock the door behind her. She did not need to. He did not try it. But in the morning, when Prudence drew back the curtains, Marigold found a folded piece of paper on the pillow beside her, which had not been there when she slept. And when she opened it, she read, in the same neat hand that had written, "Forgive me," in a ledger, "Thank you for the hour. C." She folded the note very small. She placed it inside the cover of her mother's prayer book. She did not know what she would do next, but she knew, with a certainty that had not been in her the night before, that her husband had been awake across the corridor and had written those 4 words, and had carried the paper across a connecting door he had been given permission to cross, and had not crossed further. And this, she thought, was a thing worth keeping. The Redmere stayed 3 more days. In those 3 days, Marigold Vance, Duchess of Harrowden, did something her mother would have warned her against, and her governess would have wept over. She became, in public, a perfectly correct hostess, and in private, a woman who was paying very close attention, and the combination, she discovered, was a weapon. She watched Miss Isolde Redmere at breakfast. She watched her at the pianoforte in the drawing room after dinner. She watched her when a footman brought in the post, and she watched her when Corbin entered a room, and she learned, in 3 days, a number of things that Corbin himself hadn't thought to tell her. Isolde Redmere did not love him. She had been prepared to marry him. She had perhaps once, in a girlish way, been fond of him. But what moved behind her blue eyes now was not grief. It was a kind of sharp accounting. She was in a house she had expected to be mistress of, and she was watching a merchant's daughter occupy her chair, and she was calculating whether anything could yet be salvaged. And Marigold understood this because Marigold had been raised in a merchant's house and had been listening to calculations of exactly that sort since she was old enough to understand numbers. On the second evening, Miss Redmere cornered her in the long gallery under the pretense of admiring the portraits. She stood very close. She spoke in the particular confidential tone that women use with other women when they intend to draw blood without appearing to reach for a knife. "You must forgive me, Your Grace. I confess I was surprised to hear of the marriage. We all were. Corbin had been so very private these last 2 years. And then suddenly, a settlement, a quick ceremony. No time for the announcements one usually expects. My brother quite thought there had been some scheme we had not been told of." "Your brother, is a man of business, Miss Redmere. I should think he is accustomed to arrangements being settled faster than they are announced." "Oh, yes, of course." The blue eyes were very wide. I had not thought of it that way. How fortunate that I did. Your Grace is very quick. I was raised to be, Miss Redmere. My father found it useful." Miss Redmere laughed, a small, brittle laugh, and changed the subject to the weather, and Marigold stood beside her in the gallery and understood that she had just passed, or perhaps failed, some test whose rules she had not been told. She did not particularly care which it was. She had discovered, in the speaking of it, that she was not afraid of Isolde Redmere, and the discovery was worth the cost of whichever rule she had broken. Mr. Ambrose Redmere was the dangerous one. He watched Corbin at dinner with the steady patience of a man who had lent something significant and intended to be repaid with interest. And he watched Marigold with a courtesy so uniform she could not find a seam in it. And on the second evening, when she happened to pass the library and heard her husband's voice raised for the first time since she had known him, she stopped on the carpet and listened without shame. "You knew what I was offering, Corbin. I knew what you believed you were offering. 20 years of friendship, a fair price. My sister. Your sister is not a price. Do not pretend you are above it. You took her money. You are standing in a house paid for by a stranger's daughter. Do not lecture me about what a woman is worth. Get out. Corbin. Out of this house, Redmere. Tonight." She stepped back from the door before she could be seen. She walked, very quietly, to the foot of the great staircase, and she climbed it with her hand steady on the banister and her face composed. And she went to her own rooms, and she sat down at the writing desk and began, with a hand that did not shake at all, to write her father a letter. She did not finish it. Halfway through the second page, a knock came at her door. Not the connecting door, the corridor door. She set down her pen. "Come in." Prudence entered. Prudence, who had been with her 4 days. Prudence, who was pale. "Your Grace, forgive me. There is a letter for you. It was not brought with the post. A rider brought it to the kitchen door not 10 minutes ago. He did not wait for a reply." "A rider?" "A hired man, Your Grace. He would not give his name." She took the letter. She dismissed Prudence. She waited until the door was closed. She broke the seal. The hand was unfamiliar, sloping, and careful. A woman's hand that had been schooled to imitate a man's. She read it through once. She read it through twice. Then she sat very still for a long time and did not read it again. "Your Grace, you do not know me, but I knew your husband's mother. I was her companion in the last year of her life. There are things about the house you are now living in that your husband has not told you, because he does not know them himself, and I have held them for 14 years because I had no one to give them to. His father did not die, as the family believes. His mother did not die, as the family believes. Emily, if you wish to know the truth of the house you have married into, come to the Blackhorn Posting Inn on the Norchester Road on Friday at noon. Come alone. Burn this letter. You will not regret it. A friend. She did not burn it. She folded it. She placed it inside her mother's prayer book, beside the note that said, 'Thank you for the hour.' And she sat at the writing desk and understood that she had, in the space of 4 days, acquired 2 pieces of paper that between them contained the whole of her marriage, and she did not yet know which of them weighed more. She slept badly. In the morning she found Corbin in the breakfast room before the servants had finished laying the table. He looked as though he had not slept at all. He rose when she entered. He seated her. He poured her coffee himself with his own hand, which was something he had never done. And she watched him do it, and understood that the scene in the library last night had cost him something, and that he did not know whether she knew, and that he was choosing, nevertheless, to treat her differently this morning than he had treated her the morning before. The Redmeres are gone. I know. You heard. I heard. Marigold. Tell me one thing. Does he have any claim on you that my father's settlement did not discharge? No. You are certain? I am certain. Your father's money was enough, more than enough. Ambrose's offer was always a separate matter, a personal one. He wanted me to marry his sister, not because I needed to, but because he believed I owed it. I do not. Very well. She buttered a piece of toast. She ate it slowly. She had discovered, in the last 12 hours, that she was capable of eating under circumstances that would once have robbed her of appetite entirely, and she filed this among the other things she was learning about herself. Corbin. Yes. I'm going to Norchester on Friday. He looked up. Norchester. There's a shop there. Millinery. My mother spoke of it. I would like to see it. I will take you. No. Marigold. I will take Prudence, and a footman, and the carriage. I will go in the morning. I will be back by nightfall. I would like to do this one thing without you, Corbin. I would like to know that I can. He was silent. He looked at his coffee. He looked at her. He set the cup down. Take Jared as your coachman. He is the best we have. And take 2 footmen, not 1. The road can be rough past the ford. Thank you. Marigold. Yes. If anything on that road is not what it seems, you will send word. I will. She did not tell him it was already not what it seemed. She arrived at the Blackhorn on Friday, a quarter hour before noon. The common room was nearly empty. A woman sat alone at the table by the fire. She was perhaps 60 years old, dressed in plain dark wool, with a face that had once been handsome, and was now the face of a woman who had been burying things for a very long time. She rose when Marigold entered. She curtsied, which was unusual in a common room, and Marigold understood, from the curtsy alone, that she had once been in service in a great house. Your Grace. Sit, please. They sat. The woman did not order. Marigold did not order. Between them lay a small wooden box, no larger than a prayer book. My name is Hester Gale. I was with Her Grace, the old Duchess, from the year of 1810 until her death. I was with her the night she died. I see. Your Grace, what I am about to tell you is not a thing that will make your marriage easier. I have asked myself for 14 years whether telling it to anyone would do more harm than good. I have decided, because of what I have heard of you in the village in 4 days, that I would rather you know it than not. Go on. Her Grace did not die of a fever. She died of a fall. She fell from the landing at the top of the great staircase. His late Grace was in the house. They had quarreled that night. I heard them. I found her at the bottom of the stairs before the steward did. I have never, in 14 years, told anyone what I heard. I am telling you now because your husband does not know. He was in his regiment. He was told she died peacefully. He believes this. He has built his life around believing it. And it is a lie. Marigold sat with her hands folded in her lap. Why are you telling me? Because his father was a worse man than he knows, Your Grace, and because he has spent 2 years trying not to become his father, and he does not understand that the thing he is most afraid of becoming is not the gambler. It is the man at the top of the stairs, and he will never know to be free of it until someone who loves him tells him the truth. I do not love him. Hester Gale looked at her for a long moment. Your Grace, forgive me. You have come alone to a posting inn on a rumor to hear a dead woman's story because you heard it might matter to a man you have been married to for 11 days. I am old. I have very little left to lose. I will say only this. You may not love him yet. But you came. Marigold sat with that for a long moment. She did not answer at once. She looked, instead, at the box between them. It was very plain. The wood had been oiled recently by a careful hand. She thought of an old woman in a cottage somewhere between here and Harrowden, sitting by a small fire, oiling the box on the evening before this meeting, because even the wood had to be ready. What is in it? Letters. Her letters. A locket. And an account I wrote myself of what I heard that night. I set it down the week it happened. I have kept it in that box for 14 years. I intended, at first, to give it to your husband when he came of age. Then I intended to give it to him when he came into the title. Each time I could not. Each time I thought, he is not ready. He is still a son, and a son cannot bear this about his father. He must be something else first. I did not know what until 4 days ago. And what am I? You are the woman at the top of the stairs who is not going to fall, Your Grace. Marigold closed her eyes. She opened them. Mrs. Gale, how did you know I would come? I did not. I took the chance. I sent the letter to the kitchen door, not the front door, because I wished your maid to bring it to you rather than a footman. I gave you the choice of burning it. If you had burned it, I would have understood. I am grateful you did not. I would like you to come to Harrowden. The old woman blinked. Your Grace, I do not know yet what I will do with what you have given me. I need to think, but I do not wish you to be alone in a cottage when I have decided. I would like you to come to Harrowden, and I would like you to sit with me. And when the time is right, we will speak to my husband together, or I will speak to him alone, whichever you prefer. You have carried this for 14 years. You will not carry it another 14 days by yourself. Hester Gale's hands, folded on the wooden box, trembled for the first time. Your Grace, will you come? I will come. Thank you. Marigold took the box. She did not open it at the inn. She carried it home in her lap under her cloak, and she did not speak to Prudence on the road, and she did not look at the winter fields, and when the carriage pulled onto the gravel sweep at Harrowden, she did not wait for the footman to hand her down. She stepped out on her own. She walked into the house. She climbed the great staircase with her hand on the banister, and she stopped on the landing, and she stood for a long moment at the top of the stairs, looking down. Then she walked to her apartments, and she laid the box on the writing desk, and she opened the connecting door, and she walked through into his. He was not there. She sat down in the chair beside his fire, and she waited with the box in her lap, and when he came in an hour later and saw her, he did not speak. He closed the door. He knelt at her feet, which was something no duke should ever do for any woman, and he laid his forehead against her knee, and he said, in a voice she had not heard from him before, "Where did you go today?" "Corbin." "Where did you go?" "I went to meet a woman who loved your mother. She gave me something. I have brought it home. I do not know yet whether I am going to show it to you. I have to decide. I need you to let me decide." His hand closed around her ankle, very lightly, not holding, only resting. "Take as long as you need." "Corbin." "Yes. I think I am beginning to love you. I am telling you this because I do not wish you to hear it first from anyone else, including yourself. I am not promising anything. I am not unlocking anything. I am telling you because I said I would speak to your face, and this is your face, and I will not say it through a door." He did not move. "Marigold." "Yes. I have loved you since the morning after the wedding, when I read your note under the door, and I understood that you had more courage than I have ever had in my life." The fire cracked. She laid her hand very slowly on the crown of his bent head. and she kept it there for a long time, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to say that the silence was not already saying better. She showed him the box 3 nights later. She chose the hour carefully. Late, when the house was asleep. She brought it to his study because the study had no mirror in it, and she understood, without quite knowing how she understood, that he would not wish to see his own face while he read. She sat across the desk from him. She did not speak. She slid the box across the polished wood, and she waited. He opened it. Inside were 3 things: a small bundle of letters, tied in faded ribbon in his mother's hand, a silver locket, dented on one side, and a folded sheet of paper, older than the others, on which Hester Gale had written, in the neat hand of a woman who had been a lady's companion, an account of the night the old Duchess had died. He read the account first. She watched his face. She did not turn away, because he had told her he would speak to her face, and she intended to return him the same courtesy even when his face was very hard to look at. She watched his jaw set. She watched the color leave him. She watched his hand holding the paper tighten, and then, very deliberately, relax. He did not weep. He finished reading. He folded the paper. He placed it on the desk. He pressed both palms flat on the wood on either side of it, and he did not move for a very long time. "Corbin, give me a moment. Take as many as you need." He took several. When he raised his head, he was steady. "You have carried this for 3 days." "Yes." "Why did you not tell me at once?" "Because I did not know what it would do to you, and because I did not wish to give it to you in anger or in pity, or at a moment when you might think I was using it against you. I wanted to give it to you as something I was putting into your hands, not something I was throwing." "Marigold." "Yes, thank you. You are welcome." He looked at the locket. He did not open it. He put it into his pocket, against his ribs, where a man keeps a thing he does not yet know what to do with. "Mrs. Gale is here," she said. "At Harrowden. She has been since Saturday. I asked her to come. I thought you would wish to speak with her yourself when you were ready." He looked up. "You brought her here?" "Yes." "Where is she?" "In the West Wing, in the rooms that used to be her own, when your mother lived. Mrs. Halloran prepared them." She did not ask why. She understood. His throat worked. He did not speak for a long time. "Marigold." "Yes. I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to. I would like you to talk to her tomorrow. I would like you to ask her the things you could not ask anyone else for 14 years. And I would like you to know, when you are asking them, that she has been waiting to answer them for almost as long as you have been waiting to ask." "I will." "Good. Will you come with me?" "If you wish me to." "I wish you to." "Then yes." He stood. He came around the desk. He did not touch her at first. He stood beside her chair for a long moment, and then he sank to one knee again, the way he had knelt in his dressing room the night she brought the box home, and he took her hand, and he turned it palm up in his own, and he pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist for the length of one slow breath. "I will go to the North Wing tonight," he said. "Go." "Will you come?" "Yes." They went together. They walked through the quiet corridors with a single branch of candles between them, and she did not take his arm because he had not offered it, and she did not wish to take what was not offered. And when they reached the door of his mother's apartments, he stood before it for a long moment and did not open it. "I have not been in this room in 14 years. I know. Mrs. Halloran told you. She did." He opened the door. He walked inside. He stood in the center of his mother's room, with the book still open on the table and the shawl still folded on the chair, and he looked at it all as a grown man looks at a place he last saw as a boy. And Marigold stood in the doorway and did not follow him further, because the room wasn't hers to enter past that point. He stood for a long time. Then he said quietly, I will have it opened. I will have it aired. I will keep the book as it is, and the shawl as it is, but I will open the windows. She always liked the windows open. Yes. Marigold. Yes. Come in. She came in. He turned to her in the middle of the room, and he took her hand, and he lifted it to his mouth, and he held it there with his eyes closed for the length of 3 slow breaths, and then he lowered it, and he said, "Thank you for bringing her back to me." They did not speak of Ambrose Redmere for 2 weeks. Corbin spent the first of those weeks with Hester Gale. He walked with her in the park. He sat with her in the small morning room that had been his mother's favorite. He asked her the questions he had not been able to ask anyone, and she answered them, and sometimes he wept, and Marigold did not intrude on any of it, because she understood that this was not her grief to witness, only her gift to have made possible. Hester Gale sat for a portrait at the end of the 2nd week. Marigold had requested it. The painter came from Norchester. The sitting took 3 afternoons. When it was finished, the portrait was hung, with Hester's permission, in the long gallery at the end, farthest from the door, where the light was best. It was on the evening after the portrait was hung that Marigold said at last, "Ambrose Redmere has been writing to people in London." His eyes came up from the wine. "How do you know?" "My father wrote to me. 2 of his acquaintances have received letters inquiring, delicately, about the circumstances of our marriage, about whether the settlement was fair, about whether the bride was willing. Ambrose is a decent man in his own estimation, Corbin, but he is a proud one. You threw him out of this house. He is not going to let that pass." "What does your father say?" "My father says he will not dignify the inquiries with a response. My father says that if Ambrose Redmere wishes to dispute the marriage, he is welcome to do so in any court or any drawing room in England, and my father will meet him in either, and he will not be alone. Your father is not a man who has been laughed at in drawing rooms, Corbin. He has been laughing back, quietly, for 30 years. He is a better enemy than Ambrose Redmere has any idea of." Corbin looked at her for a long moment. "You are not the woman I married." "I am exactly the woman you married. You simply had not met her." He laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised, a sound she had not heard him make before, and she understood, hearing it, that she would spend the next 50 years attempting to hear it again, and that this was a reasonable way to spend a life. The scandal came anyway. It came as Ambrose had intended it to come, through a letter to a paper, and through whispers in 2 clubs, and through a woman in a drawing room in Bruton Street, who found it convenient, suddenly, to remember that she had always thought there was something peculiar about the Harrowden marriage. Marigold read the paper at breakfast. She folded it. She handed it across the table to Corbin without a word. Corbin read it. He set it down. "We will go to London. Yes. We will be seen. Yes. Together. Yes." They went. They took a house in Grosvenor Street for the remainder of the season, and they attended every event to which they were invited, and they attended several to which they were not, and Corbin walked her into each room with her hand on his arm and his head high, and he did not once release her hand before she was ready to release his. When women whispered behind fans, Marigold smiled at them pleasantly and made certain her smile reached her eyes. When men looked at her with the particular appraising look that men reserve for women whose virtue has been questioned, Corbin met those looks without raising his voice and without lowering his eyes, and the men, one by one, found other parts of the room to look at. She learned, in the London weeks, a thing about herself that she had not expected. She was good at this. She was good at the walking in, and the steady gaze, and the pleasant smile that was not pleasant at all. She had been raised, in her father's house, to blend. She had spent the first 3 weeks of her engagement attempting to blend and failing. She discovered now, in the 2nd month of her marriage, that she had stopped trying. She did not blend. She moved through the drawing rooms like a woman who had already decided, for herself, that she was welcome in them, and the drawing rooms, by some slow and unwilling instinct, began to agree. At the Tarlington Ball, 3 weeks into the season, Ambrose Redmere himself was present. He made the error of approaching them at the edge of the ballroom, with Isolde on his arm, and offering his hand to Corbin with a small, cold smile. Corbin did not take the hand. He said, quietly, so that only the 3 of them and Marigold could hear, "My wife and I are happy to receive any apology you wish to make, Redmere, in writing, to the paper that printed your letter. Until then, you will not speak to us in public or in private. If you approach my wife again, I will take it as a matter of honor. I trust I don't need to be clearer." Ambrose went white. Isolde went a shade no paint could produce. They left the ball within the quarter hour. The retraction appeared in the paper 11 days later, brief, chilly, and unambiguous. By the end of the season, the same women who had laughed behind fans in Bruton Street were sending Marigold mourning cards, and Marigold accepted some of them and declined others, according to a standard she had established privately with Corbin, and the standard was this: anyone who had laughed at her for being foolish would not be received. Anyone who had been silent could be forgiven. Anyone who had defended her, however quietly, would be a friend for life. Her father came to London in May. He walked into the drawing room in Grosvenor Street, and he looked at his daughter, and he looked at his son-in-law, and he held out both his hands to Corbin without speaking, and Corbin took them, and the 2 men stood that way for a long moment, while Marigold pretended to be very interested in a vase on the mantel. "My girl looks well," her father said at last. "She is well, sir. She looks like her mother did at that age. I have seen the portrait. Yes, she brought it with her. I noticed, sir." Her father looked at him. "Harrowden." "Sir, I wrote 'forgive me' in a ledger once, too, a long time ago. My wife found it. I will tell you someday how she answered it. It took her longer than 11 days. You are a fortunate man." "I know it, sir." They returned to Harrowden in June. The roof had been mended. The portrait gallery had been refilled, not with the old paintings, which were gone beyond recovery, but with new ones Marigold had commissioned quietly in London. A painting of her mother, a painting of Corbin's, a small portrait of Hester Gale, who had been persuaded, with great difficulty, to sit for a second smaller version for Marigold's morning room, because the house would hold its dead and its living differently from now on. On a warm evening in late June, 2 months after the season had ended, Marigold stood at the top of the great staircase with her hand on the banister, looking down. She had stood there once before, the day she brought the box home, and she had understood, that day, what had happened on the landing 14 years ago. She stood there now and understood a second thing. The house had been frightened of itself for 14 years. The house was not frightened anymore. Corbin came up the stairs toward her. He stopped 2 steps below. "Marigold, Your Grace. Still. Habit. I am going to kiss my wife at the top of her own staircase. I thought I should warn her. I am warned." He came up the last 2 steps. He kissed her. He had kissed her before, many times in the months since the box, but he had not kissed her here, and she understood the choice of place, and she understood that he did too, and when he drew back, his eyes were wet, and he was smiling. "I have been thinking," he said, about what you said to me in the dressing room the 4th night, that you were going to be very clear with me. Do you remember?" "I remember. I would like to be clear with you now. I married you for a bargain. I would like you to hear me say that I know it, and that I will carry the knowledge of it for as long as I live, because I do not wish to forget what you were willing to bear in the first 11 days of our marriage, while I was still, in secret, my father's son. I do not wish to be let off. I do not wish the story softened. I wish to remember. Corbin. But I would like you to know one thing more. I married you for a bargain. I chose you on every day after. I choose you now. I will choose you tomorrow and next year and the year after that, and for however many years are given to us. And if I am ever offered a bargain again, of any kind, by any person, including myself, I will refuse it, because a bargain is the thing I married you to escape, and you are the thing I did not know I was choosing, and you are the only thing in this house, or in my life, or in any house I have ever lived in, that I have ever chosen freely. She did not answer at once. She took his hand. She brought it to her cheek. She held it there. Corbin. Yes. When I locked the door on our wedding night, do you know what I was thinking? Tell me. I was thinking that I had spent my whole life being given to people as a sum of money, and I had decided, in the carriage on the way here, that the sum was going to stop with you. And I locked the door because I did not yet know whether you would be worth the one thing I had never given anyone freely, which was myself. I did not lock it against you. I locked it so that when I opened it, if I opened it, you would know it had been opened and not taken. Marigold. I am telling you this because I wish you to know that when I did open it, 3 nights later, I opened it freely, and I have opened it freely every night since. And I will open it freely for the rest of my life, not because you are a duke, and not because you paid my father's debts with your name, and not because society has decided to smile at me again. I will open it because you are the man who knelt at my chair and let me decide. Do you understand? I understand. Good. Marigold. Yes. I love you. I know. Below them, the clock in the great hall began to chime the hour, and on the lower landing, Mrs. Halloran passed with a tray and pretended very hard not to see them. And through the long windows at the foot of the stairs, the last of the summer sun was going down over the park in a long, quiet gold. And Marigold Vance, Duchess of Harrowden, who had been married in winter and locked a door on her wedding night, and opened it in her own time, stood at the top of her own staircase, with her husband's hand against her face, and understood, at last, the full shape of what she had walked into. It had not been a bargain. It had been a door, and she had opened it. Thank you for staying with Marigold and Corbin until the very end. Their story began with a locked door and a silence on the other side of it, and it ended on a staircase that had once held only grief. If it reminded you that being chosen freely is worth more than being taken generously, that the bravest thing a person can do is make another person wait, and that love, real love, is always a door and never a price, then please subscribe and ring the bell, because there are more stories like this one waiting. More locked doors, more quiet openings, more hearts that learn, slowly, to trust the hand on the other side. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories are told.